Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about a single afternoon, a chance meeting at a little church party that would light a fuse, start a musical revolution, and change the world forever.
So, how do you start a revolution? Well, sometimes it doesn't begin with a bang or some big declaration. Sometimes it all starts at a simple village party on a blistering hot Saturday afternoon.
We're going back to July 6, 1957. The place is the St. Peter's Church Festival in Liverpool, England. And this right here, this is the moment everything changed for music.
All right, let's get into it. To really, truly understand the miracle of that day, we first have to get a feel for the time and the place where it all went down.
This was Liverpool right after the war. The city had been battered, and it was definitely struggling. But because it was this huge port, it was also a kind of gateway, a place where new sounds and new ideas were always washing up on shore from across the ocean.
And in the mid-50s, this craze called skiffle just swept through the city. The reason it was so huge? Anyone could do it. Skiffle was totally a do-it-yourself kind of music. You didn't need to be a pro. All you needed was some spirit and some energy.
So how were they hearing all this new stuff? Well, sailors were bringing records home from America. Blues, country, and this electrifying new sound called rock and roll. At night, kids would be huddled around their radios, fiddling with the dial, just trying to catch a crackly signal from Radio Luxembourg to hear a little bit of Elvis.
And in this city, just buzzing with all these new, exotic sounds, two very different boys were listening, dreaming, and they were heading right for each other on a collision course.
First, you've got John Lennon. He was a sharp, super witty, and just restless kid. He had this tough guy act, but it was really hiding a pretty turbulent home life.
You know, he was pretty much abandoned by his parents. He was raised by his Aunt Mimi, who was stern but also really loving. Still, it left him with this deep, deep feeling of rejection that honestly fueled his art for his entire life.
Music became his way out. He started a skiffle band called the Quarry Men. And on stage, his raw charisma and that quick wit, it totally made up for his, let's say, limited guitar skills. The band was his gang, and make no mistake, he was the leader.
Meanwhile, across town, Paul McCartney's childhood, it was the complete opposite. He grew up in this warm, stable home that was just filled with music all the time.
See, Paul's dad, Jim, he had been a jazz band leader, and he taught Paul all the basics of melody and harmony. For Paul, music wasn't an escape, it was just part of his family's DNA.
But then, when his mother, Mary, died tragically from cancer, Paul's whole world just fell apart. He grabbed onto the guitar like it was a lifeline, and he practiced and practiced until he'd mastered all the licks of his American rock and roll heroes.
So you had these two forces of nature, right? John, the raw, insecure rebel, and Paul, the polished, confident showman. They were basically two sides of the exact same coin, and that coin was about to get flipped. Which brings us right back to that hot Saturday afternoon. On July 6, 1957, these two separate paths, forged in the same city but in totally different worlds, they finally came together.
So after the Quarry Men finished their set, a mutual friend brings this younger boy backstage. He was a round-faced 15-year-old, and he introduced himself as Paul McCartney. Now, instead of being all shy or intimidated by these older guys, Paul just confidently picks up a guitar and asks if he can play.
And then, he just absolutely stunned them. He jumps right into Eddie Cochran's 20 Flight Rot, which was a song the Quarry Men had tried and failed to learn. Paul knew every single word, every tricky chord change, and he just performed it with the skill and the swagger of a pro.
John just stood there watching, totally captivated. He later admitted that his first thought was, he's as good as me. But deep down, he knew the truth. Paul wasn't just as good, he was way better. That night, walking home, John wrestled with this huge decision that was going to define his entire future. If he brought Paul into the band, he wouldn't be the undisputed kingpin anymore. It was a serious threat to his ego.
But John's ambition was just stronger than his insecurity. He knew Paul's talent was a total game changer, and that making the band stronger was what really mattered. So, he made the call.
And with that one single decision, the most important creative partnership in the history of popular music was officially born.
Soon after that, Paul would introduce John to another friend, a younger, quieter kid from school who just so happened to be a guitar prodigy. His name was George Harrison.
So, the foundation was set.
You had three boys from Liverpool, all brought together by a love for American rock and roll, but the journey from a church garden party to taking over the entire world, well, that had only just begun.